So let's maybe, so as was mentioned, this is the third in a series of talks on Kamma. So today we can look at Cūḷakammavibhaṅga Sutta, which is MN 135. Okay, so this is actually from the, extracted from Bhikkhu Nyanamoli and Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation of the middle length discourses of the Buddha. This is on page 1053 for those who have a copy of this book. And if you look at it, the sutta is actually runs into 21 paragraphs. So we will go through the paragraphs, the 21 paragraphs in this sutta, and then we'll have some discussions at the end of it. So I think it's important that since we are all listening to the Dhamma talk today, we should all focus our mind and compose our thoughts and focus on the Buddha's teachings by remember four things. Yeah, the first thing is, what is important is the words that we hear and not the person who is speaking it. Secondly, the meaning of the words that we hear. We should think about the meaning. Thirdly, the definitive meaning and not just provisional meaning. And finally, which is very important for us to be able to have direct non-conceptual experience, which comes about through practice of what we have heard. So, this is the sutta called the Cūḷakammavibhaṅga Sutta. All right. Now, before I go into the sutta itself, I think it's important for us to know that this important discourse expounds the basic teachings on karma. All right. If you recall the first two sessions, if you have been attending the first two sessions, we were talking about speech, right? Speech as one expression of karma through the verbal door. So this important discourse expounds the basic teaching of karma, that one is the owner of one's karma, and we will inherit its results. And action done with a wholesome intention will lead to happiness and fortunate results, while action done with unwholesome intention would lead to suffering and misfortune. So from the Buddhist perspective, for an action to be called karma, there must be intention. In fact, this is mentioned in another discourse in the Book of Gradual Sayings, section 6, Sutta 63, called the Nibbedika Sutta, where Buddha says, it is intention that constitutes karma. All right? So when we look at this discourse, we will understand that no luck is involved. So the law of karma is not about luck, it's not about chance. The law of karma is a natural law. Likewise, it is also not malicious, and the results are entirely in accordance with one's action. So as we mentioned early on, karma is intentional action, which we do through body, speech, and thought. Now, what is important when we read this discourse subsequently is that it is the underlying intention that is called karma and not the externally manifested result or action. So there's another word called vipaka, which is the results. Okay? So let's look at the first paragraph here, paragraph 1 and 2. So in this discourse, as usual, it starts with, thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Then the Brahmin student Subha, who is Todeya's son, went to the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and amiable talk was finished, Subha, which is Todeya's son, sat down on one side and asked the Buddha a couple of questions. So before we go to the questions, just a little background on who is this Subha or Todeya's son. Now, from the commentaries, they explain a little bit about who Todeya and who Subha is. It is said that the Brahmin Todeya was a miser, a stingy person who urged others not to donate anything because it would only dissipate one's wealth. So it is said that after his death, Todeya was reborn as a dog, a female dog, in his own house. And when the Buddha went to the house for alms, the dog barked at him. The Buddha then admonished the dog that due to his evil karma, he has been reborn as a dog. And he would later be reborn in hell for barking at the Buddha. So the Brahmin's son, Subba, when he heard about this, he was angry. And the Buddha told Subba to feed the dog well and ask about the location of some buried treasures. So it is believed that Todeya was a miser. He had a lot of wealth and treasures. So he had hidden some of it under a tree somewhere in the garden. So here the Buddha told Subba, if you don't believe me, go and feed the dog, make sure the dog is well fed, and then the dog is about sleepy. And then you ask the dog about the location of some buried treasure. So the story goes, Subba did that, and then asked the dog, show me where are the treasures kept by my father, Todeya. So the story says, the dog then led Subba to the buried treasure. And when Subba found that what the Buddha said was true, he gained some faith in the Blessed One, and then decided to ask him some questions. So as I said, that's the story. That's from the commentaries. Okay, all right. Now, this is what was asked. Master Gautama, what is the cause and condition why human beings are seen to be inferior and superior? For people are seen to be short-lived and long-lived, sickly and healthy, ugly and beautiful, uninfluential and influential, or sometimes translated as powerless and powerful, poor and wealthy, low-born and high-born, stupid and wise, or sometimes translated as stupid and intelligent. So these are the set of 7 questions, so which the Buddha explains as inferior and superior. In other words, when one is born with short life, one doesn't live very long, one is sickly, born sickly, one is born ugly, uninfluential, having no power, one is poor, low-born, and stupid. And the reverse, long life, healthy, beautiful, influential, wealthy, high-born, and wise. So these are 7 sets here. Now, then the Buddha explained, student here refers to Subba, right? Buddha says, beings are owners of their action, heirs of their action. They originate from the actions, are bound to their actions, have their actions as their refuge. It is action that distinguishes beings as inferior and superior. So the Buddha gave a very short explanation by explaining what karma is, by saying that karma, that we are owners of our own action, we are heirs of our own action, that actions are that they originate, karma originate from the actions and are bound to the actions, have their actions as their refuge. So the Buddha says it is action that distinguishes beings as inferior and superior. When Subba heard this, he explained that he did not quite understand the meaning and requested for details, which the Buddha agreed to explain. Again, in the commentaries, it explained why the Buddha gave such a very brief explanation. It said that, you see, Subba being a Brahmin, so they always, they have the Vedas where they base their knowledge from. And the commentaries explain that if the Buddha were to explain in detail, then Subba would say, oh, yeah, that is what I knew, that is what I've always knew. So here the Buddha deliberately explained it in brief, so that when Subba could not understand in full, he then requested for the details. Okay? And then the Buddha explained here, right? Now, before we go into the 7 aspects, in paragraph 4 just now, when the Buddha talks about beings or owners of karma, I think it is important at this point for me just to elaborate that while this sutta speaks of one's ownership of one's karma, nowhere does it state that everything is due to karma. All right? In fact, in some other discourses, like for example, in the Sivaka Sutta, in the Samyutta Nikaya, Sutta 3621, the Buddha taught that not everything that we feel or experience is due to karma alone, but could be due to the working of any possible 8 conditions. All right? So I just wanted to highlight here that it is important for us to remember that nowhere in the Buddha's teachings, definitely not in the Sutta, where the Buddha says everything is due to karma. In fact, there's another interesting sutta. It's called the Tita Sutta, which is in the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of 3, Sutta 61, where the Buddha says that to say that everything is due to karma is false. And likewise, to say that everything is due to some divine being, like a powerful God, is also wrong. Is also false. And thirdly, to say that everything happens because of chance is also wrong. It's also wrong. So in the Tita Sutta, the Buddha makes it quite clear that to say that everything is due to karma is not correct, especially past karma. People like to think that, oh, if something bad happens, then it is because of one's past bad karma. So that need not necessarily be the case. Okay? In fact, before we understand these 7 paragraphs, I think it's good to have a little background. In another discourse, you can check this out. It's called the Karma Nidana Sutta, which is in Anguttara Nikaya, Book of 3, Sutta 33. The Buddha compares one's karma to seeds that depend on favorable conditions to germinate or could be destroyed. So which means here, the key word is conditions. So karma arises because of conditions. So that is a very important point. As I mentioned early on in the Tita Sutta, karma does not arise out of chance, right? It doesn't appear randomly. So it's because of conditions that we create. So the workings of karma, as stated here in this discourse, is in the context of a spiritual instruction to the Brahmin Subha, is actually refined in Buddhism. You have to understand that the word karma or the concept of karma already existed during the time of the Buddha. So what the Buddha did was he actually refined the concept of karma. All right. So what is important is the workings of karma as stated here in the context of spiritual instruction to the Brahmin youth, right? Because the Brahmin youth is familiar with the law of karma, which was, as I said, after all, is a pre-Buddhist notion. But the Buddha used the occasion to actually explain karma in a more refined manner. Okay? So short life, long life. All right? Now, if one kills living beings and is cruel, it is said that on the dissolution of the body after death, one will reappear in a woeful state of existence. But even on the dissolution of the body after death, one does not reappear in a woeful state, but instead is reborn as a human. One has a short lifespan. So this is explained in para 5. Now, let me just explain a little bit here. So it says that if one kills living beings and is cruel, in others have got is bloody and is always thinking about harming living beings, cruel thoughts. It is said that upon the dissolution of the body. So here you find that the Buddha is not talking about this very life itself. The Buddha is making reference to rebirth. In other words, dissolution of the body means upon death, after death, right? So one will reappear in a woeful state of existence. Now, in Buddhist cosmology, we talk about 31 planes of existence, and that can be collapsed into like 6 realms. Now, 6 realms are, of course, as we all know, the human realm, animal realm, which we can all see and feel and touch. So animal realm, human realm. And then you got the God's realm, the celestial realms, called the Deva realms. Okay. And then you got the hell realms, hell beings. And then you've got the Asuras, which are like the Titans. And then you've got what is called the departed spirits, sometimes called hungry ghosts or the Petas. So in summary, they are said to be 6 realms. Okay. Now, the happy realms are basically the human realm and the celestial realms. All right. So the other 4 are considered as woeful states. Now, of course, if you use the definition in the 31 planes of existence, which will be explained when we look at the next discourse called the Cūḷakammavibhaṅga Sutta. The Buddha talks about 31 planes of existence. So within the celestial realms, you found various sensual realms, 6 of them, as well as the Brahma realm. So we shall leave that when we come to the Cūḷakammavibhaṅga Sutta, which is part of the six talks in this series. So in this para 5, the Buddha says that one kills living beings. Now, this morning, we all recited the 5 precepts. So if one breaks the first precept of killing, right? As well as when we have a behavior or an attitude that is cruel, that is wicked, right? Negative thoughts, wanting to harm others. So upon dissolution of the body, upon death, one will reappear in a woeful state of existence. So one could be reborn in the hell realm, one could be reborn in the animal realm, one could be reborn in the asura realm, or even as a peta, right? As a departed spirit. Then the second paragraph, the second part of paragraph 5 says that, but if on the dissolution of the body after death, one does not reappear in a woeful state, but instead is reborn as a human, one has short lifespan. So here you may ask a question: if one kills, if one commits or one breaks all the other precepts, so we did all the negative, unwholesome actions, how is it that one could still be reborn in the human realm? Now that is because karma by itself is complex, because we're not just talking about karma that one has created in one lifetime, but the karma that one has created in numerous lives in the past. And some of those karma that one has created in the past, some of it could be wholesome, some could be unwholesome. So it could be because of the wholesome karma that one has conducted, one has created in previous existences that have not yet arisen, then it arises in the next rebirth. All right? Now, that will be discussed in greater detail in our next discourse called the Cūḷakammavibhaṅga Sutta. So the greater discourse on karma. So today we're looking at the lesser discourse on karma. So which gives the impression that things works in a very simplistic, in a very linear progression. But karma is actually much, much more complex than that. Okay? So if one is reborn as a human, one will have a short lifespan. Okay? So that's one of the complexities of karma. In fact, in karma is one of those teachings which is very complex, and in fact, in one of the discourse, you can check it out, it's called the Achintita Sutta, which is in Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Gradual Sayings, Book of 4, Sutta 77. It says that there are 4 things, one cannot know the full extent. It only takes the mind of a Buddha to really fully comprehend this phenomena. And one of it is the entire workings of karma, how karma actually works. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Okay, then it says, para 6, if one does not kill living beings, but is kind and gentle, on the dissolution of the body after death, one will reappear in the happy realms, so like in the heavenly realms. Okay, so if one does not kill, in other words, one observes the precepts and one practices the 10 wholesome actions, which, as I mentioned early on, will be elaborated when we come to the Cūḷakammavibhaṅga Sutta. So here in para 6, the Buddha says, if one does not kill living beings, but is kind and gentle, one is compassionate, for example, then when death takes place, one will reappear, one will be reborn in a happy realm, in one of the heavenly realms. Okay? And in Buddhist cosmology, we are not talking about one heavenly realm, we're talking about 6 celestial realms. And above the celestial realms, the celestial sensual realms, you also have the Brahma realms. Okay? However, if on the dissolution of the body after death, one does not reappear in a heavenly realm, then one will be reborn as a human being, and one will have long life. Okay? So this is para 6. Now let's go on to para 7. Now the rest will be in a similar vein. Okay? For example, if one injures living being. So compared with the para 5 and 6, where it talks about killing, about breaking the first precept, here you're talking about don't really kill the living, but you injure, you harm living beings, or you wound living beings. So on the dissolution of the body after death, one will also reappear in a woeful state. But if instead one comes back to the human state, then wherever one is reborn, one will be sickly. Okay? Then he says, if one does not injure living beings on the dissolution of the body after death, one will reappear in a happy destination. But if instead one comes back to the human state, then wherever one is reborn, one will be healthy. So again, we see the same parallel there. So I'll just go through quickly, and then we'll have some discussions about that. So there's the second pair, all right? And then the third pair will be ugliness, all right? If one is easily angry and irritable, even when criticized a little, one is offended and displays anger, hate, and bitterness. One will, on the dissolution of the body after death, reappear in a woeful state. But if one is reborn as a human, one will be ugly. So here, you will obviously get the impression that you are always angry, irritable, and you're always easily angered, you are very bitter, and then after death, you reappear in a woeful state. Okay, but if you're reborn as a human, one will be ugly. Maybe if we look at this in a different context, in a psychological context, even in this very life itself, is sometimes a person who is very good looking, can you imagine what happens when he gets angry? You find his face turns red, or you will find that he doesn't have that serene and that calm face anymore. So in a way, he becomes angry, he becomes ugly. So if this becomes habitual, like there's a word in the text, it's called achina karma, in other words, habitual karma. So if you are habitually always easily angry, the slightest criticism, you get offended, you display anger, your face turns red, and you scowl, you get very bitter, and you become very ugly even in this very life itself. So if that habitual characteristic of yours continues in this life, then naturally when you pass away upon dissolution of the body, that ugliness continues. So beauty, which is just the reverse. So if one is not easily angry and irritable, when criticized a little, is not offended, one does not become angry, hostile, and resentful, one is reborn in happy destiny. But if instead one is reborn as a human, one will be beautiful, or good looking, or handsome. So that's another pair. So we'll go on. Uninfluential. As I said, another translation is powerless, no power. If one envies, resents, and begrudges the gains, honors, and respect received by others, one will, on the dissolution of the body after death, reappear in a woeful state. So again, one could be reborn in the hell realms, one will be reborn in one of the animal realm, or in the petas, or in asuras. But if instead one is reborn as a human, one will not have power, one will not have influence. You can put it in another way, you can look at it in the present context. For example, you find that certain people have a lot of power bestowed upon them, some people have no power, some people, even when they are given to positions of power, they don't have influence. People just do not really bother too much about it. Okay, so we can see different characteristics of people. So according to this sutta, it has got a lot to do with what one has done in one's previous existence. So the reverse is true. If one does not envy, does not resent and begrudge the gains, honor, and respect received by others, one will, on the dissolution of the body after death, reappear in a happy state. Of course, you would know that in the Buddhist text, it tends to talk in terms of the negative, like, for example, the precepts we talk about not killing, not stealing, but there's also the positive aspects, which is, for example, being kind, being compassionate. So here, if you look at it, the reverse will be, for example, if one is always respectful, one gives honor to those who are view, one is humble, one is not easily envious, one is respectful, one rejoices in the happiness of others. Then when one display such characteristics, it is said that in the sutta, when one is reborn, one will be born with a lot of power and influence. Now again, it is said poverty and wealth. So one is not generous to recluses or Brahmins. One will, on the dissolution of the body after death, reappear in the woeful state. Of course, you have to understand the Buddha was speaking to Supa, who was a Brahmin. So here you can see the inclusiveness of the Buddha in terms of when it comes to generosity. The Buddha is not only talking about generosity to Buddhist monks alone or those who take refuge in the Triple Gem. Here the Buddha says, if one is not generous to recluses or to Brahmins, recluses will be like the samanas, those who have given up, the household life, those who have who has become mendicants in search for the truth. So we call them recluse or recluses, sannyasi, for example, or samanas. Like the Buddha himself started off as a recluse. So sometimes you find in the text it is said the recluse Gautama or the samana Gautama. So here the Buddha is saying that if one is not generous to recluses or to Brahmins, one will, on the dissolution of the body after death, reappear in a woeful state. So then so here you can put it the other way, in a positive state, one needs to be generous. But if instead one is reborn as a human, one will become very poor. So wealth. So if one is generous to recluses or Brahmins, one will, on the dissolution of the body after death, reappear. So generosity is always a very important characteristic of practice in Buddhism. In fact, generosity is regarded as the first of the three bases of merits, the source of merits, punya. All right, so dana, for example. Now, dana does not only mean giving food to monks, obviously. So dana means that being generous to whoever needs our help. So that's generosity. But if instead one is reborn as a human, one will become very wealthy. So if one is always very, very generous with one's wealth, with one's service, with one's ideas, so then that falls under the category of generosity. So generosity need not only means giving money. Generosity can mean giving out service, for example, helping out in a temple or helping out, providing service to an old folks home or to charities. So all this falls under generous. So that's wealth. And then the Buddha talks in para 15 about low birth and high birth. And here he says, if one is arrogant, does not show respect to those who are worthy, one will, on the dissolution of the body after death, reappear in a woeful state. But if instead one is reborn as a human, one will be born in a low caste family. Now here again, you may get the impression that the Buddha is justifying the caste system. Now in many discourses, the Buddha actually talks about that it is not by birth that one is born as a high caste or low caste, but it is by one's actions. So here I just like to emphasize that Buddha is in no way emphasizing that one is reborn or that the Buddha is justifying the caste system in India, even though he was very much born within the caste system, but by being a samana, when he leaves the home life, when he became a samana, he has actually moved out of the caste system. And you'll remember that in the sutta itself, many of the suttas, the Buddha admitted monks who are from all castes, including the lowest of the four castes. All right. So here the Buddha is not justifying the caste system. There are two very important discourses which the Buddha talks about caste, where the Buddha rejects the emphasis on caste. One is called the Vaseta Sutta, and the other is the Vasala Sutta. So we have to read this in the context, because here the Buddha is talking to Subba, who was a Brahmin. Okay? High birth. So if one is not arrogant, shows respect to those who are worthy, one will, under the decision of the body, after death, reappear in a woeful state. But if instead one is reborn as a human, one will be born in a high status family. So today, the caste system, well, even though it is still existent in India, but outside India, we don't have a caste system, but we have what is called a class system. So sometimes you also ask, you also wonder, why are certain people born in certain class? Class like, for example, the aristocratic class. Some are born in a very low status kind of society. All right. So from the Buddhist perspective, it's got a lot to do with our actions in the past. Okay, but that's not the only action. As later we will understand when we look at the following discourse called the Cūḷakammavibhaṅga Sutta. So low birth and high birth. Then likewise, stupidity. If one does not ask spiritual questions of teachers, one will, on the dissolution of the body after death, reappear in a woeful state. But if instead one is reborn as a human, one will not be intelligent, or one will be stupid. So here it says that if one does not ask spiritual questions of teachers, one does not have an inquisitive mind, does not have a mind of inquiry. You see, the very essence of the Buddha's teachings is based on inquiry, the spirit of inquiry. For example, many of you have heard of the Kalama Sutta. So the Buddha does not encourage us to accept things blindly, but to find out for ourselves. So in fact, in another discourse called the Vimamsaka Sutta, Buddha talks about the importance of inquiry. We must always inquire and not accept things blindly. This morning, when we recited the 6 virtues of the Dhamma, one of the virtues, if you remember, is called come and see, ehi passiko. All right. So this gives you the background that in Buddhist teachings, what is important is always the spirit of inquiry. Okay. So here, the Buddha is basically telling Subba that, look, if someone does not ask spiritual questions, then upon dissolution of the body after death, reappear in a woeful state. But if instead one is reborn as a human, one will be stupid or not so intelligent. So wisdom. So if one is inquisitive of spiritual questions, one will, on the dissolution of the body, reappear in woeful states. It should be will appear in a happy destination. So there's a typo error there. So if one is inquisitive of spiritual questions, one will, on the dissolution of the body after death, reappear in a happy state or in a heavenly realm. But if it's instead one is reborn as a human, one will be reborn with great intelligence. Right. So here you find that the Buddha, as I mentioned early on, emphasized the importance of being spiritually inquisitive, always asking questions. Okay, so those represent the 7 pairs of characteristics, what causes in a life to be inferior and superior. So always remember the context, because the Buddha was speaking to someone like Subba, which is well steeped in the Brahmin tradition. So he has used this occasion to explain something that would make sense to Subba. Okay? Now, para 19, which is towards the end of the discourse, the Buddha then explains in brief how karma works. All right? So here the Buddha says, the way that leads to short life makes people short-lived. The way that leads to long life makes people long life or long-lived. The way that leads to sickness makes people sickly. The way that leads to health makes people healthy. And the way that leads to ugliness makes people ugly. The way that leads to beautiful makes people beautiful. All right? And so on. All right? And then likewise in para 19, the way that leads to ugliness makes people ugly. The way that leads to uninfluential makes people uninfluential. The way that leads to makes people influential. All right, and so on. The poverty and wealth low birth and high birth, stupidity and wise and wisdom. So the Buddha basically repeats what he has mentioned to Subha. So when this was said, then Buddha repeated what he started at the beginning. If you recall, the Buddha started the discourse by mentioning that beings are owners of their actions, heirs of their actions, are bound to their actions, have their actions as their refuge. It is action that distinguishes beings as inferior and superior. So when this was said early on, Subha mentioned that all. Bhante, this is too brief. Could you explain in detail? So the Buddha took the opportunity to explain the seven characteristics. Okay, so I've just put it in a summary. Like for example, if one wants to have long life, one needs to practice compassion, needs kindness. Wants to have healthy life, one has to be very helpful, one has to be very generous with others, one has to have beautiful life, one has to learn to be patient, one learns to be humble, learn to be respectful, one wants to be influential, one learns to be selfless, one wants to be wealthy, one learns to be generous, high social class, and humility, and finally one wants to be wise, and wants learn to be spiritually inquisitive. Okay, so that's just a quick summary of the seven factors there. Now, when this was said, then Subha mentioned that magnificent Gautama, magnificent Master Gautama, magnificent Master Gautama, mentioned 3 times, and Subha mentioned that Master Gautama has made the Dhamma clear in many ways, as though he were turning upright what had been overturned, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, and holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. So this is the stock passage which you find at the end of many Buddhist suttas, when the person listening to the Buddha finally mention or exclaim that they have understood the teachings. So finally, the sutta concludes with Subha going to the Buddha, saying, I go to Master Gautama for refuge, and the Dhamma, and to the Sangha of bhikkhus for refuge. So Subha says, let Master Gautama remember me as a lay follower who has gone to him for refuge, for life. Okay? So to conclude, I think, as I mentioned early on at the beginning of this sutta, it is important for us not to just look at the effects, but more important is to actually look at the causes. All right? But one way of understanding this sutta is that to understand that the Buddha was using Subha's language as a form of dialectics, by which the Buddha hopes to lead Subha from his own accepted premises to a Buddhist conclusion. And if you recall what I've just mentioned, when the Buddha took each aspect of Subha's question, the Buddha presented it back to him within a framework of intention and ethics. All right. So, for example, the causes of beauty, wealth, good health, what else? Good and worldly spiritual life. So, according to the Buddha, this is what you call the moral quality of one's individual behavior. And the antecedent of one's moral behavior is what? It's actually the moral nature of one's mind. So this is the real point the Buddha is making. Okay, as I mentioned early on, the Buddha, I mentioned that in the Nibbedika Sutta, the Buddha says, what is karma? Karma is the intention. So here, without being very specific about karma being intention, the Buddha was actually talking about one's moral behavior as the moral nature of one's mind. And I think that is the real point the Buddha was making here. And the other thing I thought I should also mention when we read this sutta, so that we do not get a wrong impression that the Buddha was justifying the caste system, or the Buddha was justifying, poverty. Someone may even argue that when you use that kind of similes, then you are saying that, well, a person is poor, that's because of his bad karma. All right, so as a result, it can even be used as a basis for suppression. All right, so I don't think that that was really the intention of the Buddha. The basis of morality, if you look at in Buddhism, is found between the quality of what I call behavior and the mind. So this is the point to be extracted from the text. What is or is not the cause of ugliness, poverty, or foolishness. All right. So causal moral basis is founded on the quality of the individual. Now, in fact, in the next discourse in the Cūḷakammavibhaṅga Sutta, you find that all this has got soteriological implications. In fact, it establishes a foundation of individual moral volition, of intention for the path to salvation or path to deliverance. Okay, so I think that's a very important aspect that I thought I want to highlight when we look at this discourse, because sometimes many people jump to the conclusion that this is a very simplistic way of interpreting karma. Okay, I think it's 10 a.m., so I should stop here, and we have about 30 minutes for Q&A. I believe there will be many questions, so I should allow the audience to ask questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Benny. Brothers and sisters, you have any questions for Brother Benny, please type your questions into the chat, the Zoom chat. For those of you who are streaming live from Facebook and YouTube, you may post your questions in the comment section below. Thank you. Yes, we have a question. Karma arises from intention. Dissolution of karma from condition. If I understand it correctly, could you please help explain further?
Okay, karma arises from intention, yes. So dissolution of karma from condition, okay. I'm not sure what you mean by this. What do you mean by dissolution of karma from conditions? There's no mention about dissolution of karma. Well, karma arises from intention, yes, through body, speech, and mind. Is it? Are you asking about the end of karma? Well, the ending of karma is, for example, it is said that when we do wholesome actions, we have wholesome intentions. We have when we do wholesome actions, we have wholesome results, wholesome vipaka. When we do unwholesome actions, we have unwholesome results. When we do a combination of wholesome and unwholesome actions, then we have a combination of wholesome and unwholesome vipaka. All right. When we do neither of that, then you have got neither wholesome and unwholesome. So this is said to be the ending of all karma. So it is a white karma leads to white results, black karma leads to black results, white and black karma leads to black and white results. So neither good or neither white nor black karma leads to neither good or bad results. And what our karma would be, the ending of all karma is when we practice in accordance with the Eightfold Path. Okay. So I'm not sure if that's your question. Yeah, not everything that happens is due to karma. Not everything that happens is due to two aspects here. Not everything that happens is due to past karma is one conception, because many things could happen in present karma, right? Need not necessarily past karma. So it could be due to present karma. Now, another extension is not everything that happens is due to karma, because karma is only one of the 5 natural laws. I think we mentioned that in the earlier section. For example, if there's an earthquake, it's not due to karma, it's due to some law of physics. If you walk up to the top of a 10-story building, when you jump down, then you hurt yourself or you kill yourself, that's because of the law of gravity. All right, so that's not because of karma. So karma operates in the moral sphere. Karma has got to do with our intentional action. So not everything is due to karma, can be understood in 2 ways. Not everything is due to past karma, because it could be your present karma. And secondly, could be due to 4 other factors, not necessarily karma, because there are 5 natural laws called the niyamas. Okay, brother Tik Hong's question is yes, the end of karma. Yeah. So it is said that you see, when you do good, you have good results. You do bad, you got bad results. You still be reborn, right? So it is only when karma is ended, then one is not reborn, which is the aim, the final aim of the Buddhist practice, when there's no more rebirth. So that's the end of karma. And it is said that the end of karma happens when one practices Eightfold Path, both in its entirety. Okay. Okay. The next question is: if we have unwholesome thought, but because of fear of karma, we refrain from turning into speech or action, will we still suffer for consequence of a bad karma, bad thoughts, or is the consequences not as bad? Okay. So Doreen's question is about: we have an unwholesome thought, but because we fear karma, we refrain from turning it into speech or action. Okay. So in other words, the karma that only stays in the mind, the intensity will not be so strong. So as a result, even if we have any unwholesome result, it will not be, the intensity, it will not be heavy. All right. But if that thought, which is negative, we translate it into speech, because of our anger, we have angry thoughts, and then we start scolding people, and so that manifests in speech. And it's not even that, we take a stick and we hit someone with physical action, then obviously the vipaka will be strong, much stronger. But if it remains only in our mind, then the resultant will be much less. Okay, so that's let me see. Now, okay, suddenly we have so many questions. Yeah, so I've got to the first question.
So the next question is: I have started to do gardening. Will watering plants and digging into the soil bring about any karmic repercussions, as I might have killed worms and insects from watering and digging the soil?
Yeah. Okay, this question, if you're a monk or a nun, then there is a particular precept that you're not supposed to, you're basically not supposed to gardening, because in the process you may actually accidentally kill. Now, when you're watering plants and digging into the soil, so you ask yourself, okay, do I have an intention to kill? Do I have an intention to harm living beings? Right? So you're watering the plants. Okay. While watering the plants and you find that there is an insect there, you can always take the insect out. All right. You are digging the soil and you find that as you dig deeper, you find there's some worms. And what you could do is to take the worms out. All right. So deliberately, you try not to kill any living beings. Okay. So as a lay person, okay, as a lay person, the intention that there's no prohibition from doing gardening. Okay. Okay. Is there a next question?
We have a question from Facebook. Can bad karma be alleviated or eliminated by good wholesome deeds, chanting, and other things?
Well, it depends what type of bad karma that we are referring to. For example, there's karma which is called garuka karma, heavy karma. Like for example, in the text it is mentioned if one kills one's parents, or one tries to, or one kills an arahant, those are really heavy karma. Okay, so those type of karma one will have to kind of pay back in different ways. But most of the time, you find that a lot of our karma, we can actually elevate it by good, wholesome deeds. In one of the discourse, one of the sutta called the Lonapala Sutta, it's called Lonapala Sutta, or translated the salt crystal sutta, the Buddha mentioned that if the simile, like for example, you have a glass of water, and you put a cube of salt or a lump of salt, and then you taste that glass, you taste the water in that glass, you find that the water there is salty. But if you pour this same glass of water with that lump of salt into a big basin of clear water, when you drink from that big basin, you find that the water does not taste salty. But it doesn't mean that there's no salt there. So likewise, that sutta gives us the understanding that yes, we can do a lot of good deeds to actually overcome our bad karma. And in the Buddhist teachings, we talk about purification. Now, how do we about the purification of objects? In other words, if we have done something unwholesome, we could go in front of the Buddha image and then take refuge and say, yeah, this is what I've done. I will not repeat this mistake. So you have a strong determination not to do it. You can also dilute our bad karma by doing a lot of wholesome deeds. All right. Chanting is one of it. You could do meditation. You could do dana. You could do, make sure we keep our our precepts. We have got 5 precepts, right? Sometimes if we break the first precept, we must not justify by saying, oh, because we break the first precept, then it doesn't bother about it. Then the other 4 precepts doesn't matter. In fact, the other 4 precepts matters a lot. So if we break one precept, always remember we've got 4 other precepts we should hold very, very strongly. So that at the end of the day, we always try to keep all our 5 precepts well. Okay? So karma can be elevated or eliminated. Maybe not eliminated, it can be diluted, all right, by doing good, wholesome deeds, all right, in the present life. So this is what is meant by present karma. So present karma can actually create conditions, positive conditions for future life. Okay. Next question.
The next question. If our power of restraint was not strong enough, and we had unwholesome action or speech, but later felt remorse, is remorse itself another bad karma, or is it better to feel remorse than not to have any guilty feelings?
Yeah, I think there's a very fine or thin line between having a guilty feeling and feeling remorse. If we define feeling remorse as we contemplate on an action that we have done and we know that action is not good, and then we tell ourselves we will not do it again. That is different from having a guilty feeling and say, oh, I broke my first precept, or I said something terrible to this person, and then that thought continues to stay in one's mind day in, day out. That is not good. Then we generate a lot of negative thoughts. But what is important is for us to know that, yes, what we have said is not good, or what we have done is unwholesome. Having known it, we leave it aside. And more importantly, what do we do next? We make a strong determination that we will not repeat that mistake. All right? So rather than continuing to feel guilty, because you continue to feel guilty, you may not do anything about it. You keep on blaming yourself, you self-criticize, and you say, oh, I should have done it, but you have already done it. So you have already done it. So what is more important is to think, what can I do? You can perhaps even go to that person and apologize and say, look, I'm really sorry about this. then that will really get the thing off your mind, right? Or if you have killed, maybe not killed, or you've really done something else that is constitutes breaking the precepts, then what you should do is make a wholesome determination, a strong determination that you will not repeat that mistake. I think that's very important. What we do next. Okay.
The next question is: karma is complex. One of the reasons for current woeful state may be due to past karma. How would a wise Buddhist be accepting current condition while also taking corrective action to reduce the suffering of current state, if that is possible?
So one who understands karma, for example, if one is in a current suffering state, okay, I think rather than saying, oh, I'm in a suffering state, that's because of my past karma. The question is, what have we done to overcome this suffering state? Okay, say for example, one is sick. Okay, we should not immediately jump to the conclusion, oh, I'm sickly because of my past karma. Therefore, I will just let this past karma run its course, and hopefully that my next life I will not have this sick. I think that will be a very fatalistic perspective, because as it mentioned in the Sutta Sutta, not everything is due to past karma. Okay. So, for example, using sickness as an example, if this life you're quite sick, always sick. So the question is, do you make effort to heal yourself? In the sense of, do you see a doctor? Do you maybe, with sufficient exercise, you change your diet? You've done everything possible, to alleviate the suffering that you're going to. If you're obese, for example, you really take steps to try to overcome it. Now, you have done everything that is possible, your suffering remains. Then you tell yourself, well, this could be actually a past karma that is ripening. And because it is a past karma that is ripening, I will just let it take its course. Now, having said that, what is important is your present karma. What do you do in the present? Okay? So instead of feeling fatalistic, instead of having a wrong view, so the right view is, I ensure that my present actions from now onwards are wholesome. Because these present actions, if you do now, which is wholesome, that by itself could also dilute some of the bad karma that ripens, in other some of the vipaka that ripens. So that could actually dilute it. So if you look at the Lonapala Sutta, so the salt crystal sutta, then you find that that is one way we can actually overcome our past karma.
The next question: is there such a thing as collective karma?
Is there such a thing? Oh, okay. Is there such a thing as collective karma? Now, karma, yes, there's such an expression as collective karma. Like, for example, we have a family karma. Why is it that we ended up being born in a particular family? Why is it that we end up being born in a particular country? Why we are born in a particular ethnic group? Like, why you're born into a Malaysian Chinese family or a Malaysian Indian family? So there is such a thing as collective karma. But again, what is important is not the result, not the vipaka, is what do we do about it? Okay, what do we do next? Okay, so the collective karma, yes, is one of those concepts. Sometimes we hear people say, oh, sometime in a plane crash, our 350 people, 300 people died, but 50 people did not die. All right, so the 350 people all had a collective karma, but because of one's also have an individual karma. So each one of us have our own individual karma. All right, sometimes if we have strong, very powerful, wholesome karma, even in this very life itself, we can actually dilute or negate some of the negative karma. So while we may be part of the collective karma, so we may be part of the terrible accident, but when everybody got killed, but we don't get killed. Right? So sometimes it happens. sometimes we read a lot about this. But karma is complex, all right? So I don't think I'm doing justification by giving a very simplistic explanation of it, okay? But trying to understand from the text, so this is one way that it explains.
The next question is from Facebook. A mentally depressed person may give rise to unwholesome intention and actions which is out of his or her control. Will he still suffer unwholesome vipaka?
Well, yeah, he may not, because he may still be mentally, what do you call it, mentally unstable, but there's still the intention, right? He still would have the intention. So because the intention is still there, unless there's no intention, right? So from the Buddhist perspective, karma is always intention. So even he may be mentally, what do you call it, mentally unstable. So the intention is still there.
Next, may I know what is the best way to share merit if other than offering to Sangha?
Well, they are said in the text, it says 3 bases of merit. All right, 3 bases of merits. One is through dana, the other one is through sila, and the third one is through bhavana. In other words, we accumulate merits. In Pali, it's called punya. So through dana. And dana, as I mentioned earlier on, does not only mean offering food to the monks. All right? It does not only mean that. Dana can mean, for example, offering material support to those who really in need of it. In a natural disaster like a tsunami, you do dana. You give old clothing, you give money. So that is also dana, not only to monks. Giving Dhamma teachings is also a form of dana. The Buddha says the highest gift is the gift of truth. So that's also giving. Okay? And when we give, we got also to check our thoughts, our intention. Do we give with kindness? Do we give with compassion? Do we give with really thinking of the well-being and happiness of the other person? Or do we give out of fear? Do we give out of greed? Do we give out of our self-interest? So even giving itself can be giving by itself, of course, is wholesome, but giving itself can be diluted if our intention is unwholesome. Okay, but giving is just one of the bases of merits. The other one is sila, which is morality. In other words, keeping the 5 precepts is a very important part of creating punya, creating merits. Keeping our 5 precepts, practicing the 10 wholesome actions through body, speech, and mind, and finally, cultivating our mind. Always filling our minds with positive thoughts and creating good conditions. Right? So that's why it said 3 bases of merits. Okay, one is through giving, the other is through practicing a moral way of life, and thirdly is through cultivating the mind. Okay?
Next question. We always talk about abstaining from killing beings. How about plants, as scientists nowadays discovered that plants too can feel?
Well, in the Buddhist explanation of what constitutes a sentient being, the plant that doesn't fall into that category. Yeah, plant doesn't fall into the category because from the Buddhist perspective, it has got a mind and a body. Okay, so maybe the plant has got the body, the plant may be able to respond to stimulus. But in the Buddhist definition of what constitutes a sentient being has got a mind, that means it has got feelings, it has got perception, it is able to cognize, and then it has got consciousness, it has got mental activity. All right, so from the Buddhist perspective, a plant does not fall into that category of a living being. So it may be a living thing, I'm not sure the definition, but from the Buddhist perspective, we don't include a plant or a vegetable as a living. Okay? But having said that, I think earlier on there was a question about gardening. So the monks, the monastics, they have a particular rule which disallows them from plucking flowers and or plants and so on.
We have a question from Facebook. Back to the gardening issue. I love my plants and there are pests like snails, caterpillars, etc. Will removing them and putting them in the garbage bags deemed as bad karma? I do have the intention to remove them.
Yeah. Well, if you remove them without killing them and you put them in a garbage bag, so you have to ask yourself, would it kill them? So if by so doing you kill them, then obviously you're committing the act of killing. All right. So it is a choice we have to make. Okay. So if you want to do gardening and there are snails in the garden, so if you kill the snails, obviously you're killing them. All right. But if you take the snail out and then you put it outside the house, all right, then you're not killing the snail, isn't it? Right. So it is a personal decision, a personal choice. As I said, you dig the ground, you see there are worms, but you just let the worms be, but you don't kill the worms, then you're not killing them. But you deliberately you use your spade to go and cut the worm into two, then you're killing the worm. Right? So the choice is ours, the decision is ours. So again, it backs to our intention.
The next question is actually the request for Brother Benny to share your slides. So we will request the slides from you after this. Is that all right, Brother Benny?
Yeah, my slides are all extracted from the sutta itself. So as I mentioned in the earlier two sessions, I've paraphrased what is mentioned in the actual text itself. So I would strongly recommend that you read the actual text, the one on the page 1053, so that you get a full translation of the 21 paragraphs. So what I've done is, for the purpose of this talk, is just to paraphrase the various paragraphs in Buddhist or Nyanamoli Bhikkhu's translation. But by all means, you can have the slides.
All right, so this is the last question from YouTube. I have also heard that intention is karma. How does this correspond to action is karma?
Well, the word karma mean action, all right? But from the Buddhist perspective, it is just not any ordinary action. It is intentional action, all right? So if we use in a very broad sense, we say, oh, karma is action. So we say action and result, action and result. So there are two words here, is karma and vipaka. So from a Buddhist perspective, when we talk about an action, so for an action to be known as karma, there must be intention. All right? If there is no intention, it is just an ordinary action, but it doesn't constitute karma. So remember, when we say karma is an intentional action. So the key word here is intentional action. If there's no intention, it is still an action, but it is not karma. If you accidentally say, you're driving, it's raining, your wiper is on, and then suddenly a beetle falls in front of your wiper, and then because the wiper blades was turning left, right, and then the beetle dies. It's an action. It's an action. Because you switch on the wiper blade causes the beetle to die. So it's an action, but you have no intention to kill that beetle. It happens to fall on your windscreen. So that is not considered as karma. So we would not say, I committed a karmic action. Yes, I have an action. And that action, as a result of that action, that beetle dies. But you have no intention to kill that beetle. So because of that, we don't call it karma. Okay?
We noticed there's small questions coming in, but due to time constraints, I'm afraid we will not be answering the questions. So thank you very much for your questions that you've submitted. And thank you very much, Brother Benny, for the enlightening Dharma sharing and a timely reminder to all to always do good and avoid evil. On behalf of BAPS and all participants, I would like to invite all to express our gratitude to Brother Benny by saying Sadhu 3 times together. The host will unmute everyone, and at the ring of the bell, let us say Sadhu together.
Sadhu, 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 sadhu.
We have now come to the end of our session. Once again, thank you for your participations, and do remember to join us again next week for the 4th session. Thank you.